Hi everybody! This video is going to take a look at the math basics that create the code in our number line step by step. These were first introduced in the video 1111, the unified field, so if you haven't seen that, it's a good place to start so this has context. The different sections that we're going to take a look at are prime and composite numbers, first of all, prime partners, prime partner formula, threshold primes, palindromic code, compacting primes, composite radii, averages and ratios, the symmetry and charge aspect, and then gravity and the unified field. Here's our multiplication table. You can see the red boxes along the top row and then the left-hand column. Those contain the prime numbers. Prime numbers can only be created by multiplying 1 times themselves. Outside of 1, 2, and 3, all of the other numbers on the multiplication table are composites, meaning they are created in more than one way, outside of just 1 times themselves. By understanding how one piece of this geometry is formed, you can understand how they are all formed. Each piece is bound by prime numbers, meaning that primes essentially act as bookends to the geometry. The primes are shown in red here, and the black numbers are composites. We are excluding numbers 1 through 4 initially because 2 and 3 are currently considered primes, but they don't adhere to the same rules that all of the other primes follow. So the first range of numbers we're going to be taking a look at begins with 5, which is a prime, and ends with its prime partner, which is 13. Each piece of geometry within the number line contains an odd quantity of numbers. Because of that, one number is a center point or median in that range of numbers that form a piece of geometry. For example, if you have 3 apples, the second one is the median or the center point. From 5 through 13, 9 is that center point. Connected by the arc, numbers 7 and 11 are the first pair of prime partners surrounding center point 9. Prime partners are symmetric to the center point of each piece of geometry. There's only one number between 7 and 9 and one number between 9 and 11. Here the next prime partners symmetric to center point 9 are 5 and 13, and they're also shown connected by an arc. There are 3 numbers between 5 and 9 and 3 numbers between 9 and 13. As we're dealing with the unified field, physics comes into play. There are 4 forces of nature currently accepted by physics. Any version of the unified field must account for all 4 of these: the strong force, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, and gravity, although some would debate about gravity being a force at all. Basically, the way we're using math and number currently is a deteriorated version of its wholeness. This linear approach to number is comparable to particle decay of atoms. The force relevant here is the weak nuclear force. All pairs of prime partners follow the same formula. A plus C equals 2B. In this formula, the center point is B. Primes to the left are A, primes to the right are C. I'm not sure who coined the term quantum cosmology, but it appears to perfectly reflect what's occurring within our number line. These prime partner relationships likely tie into the gravitational coupling between elementary particles. Further, if we consider A side negative and C side positive, a parallel could be drawn to the even numbers of protons and electrons within an atom. And at the same time, these relationships reflect the structure of solar systems. To take a look at that formula closer, if we add 5 plus 13, we get 18, which is the center point times 2, 9 times 2. If we take 7 plus 11, that sum is also 18. So both of those follow the A plus C equals 2B formula. Now we're taking a look at the threshold primes. These are the most external prime partners that bookend each piece of geometry. Here, these are 5 and 13. Numbers inside of the threshold primes belong to that center point in geometry. Numbers outside of them do not. The A plus C equals 2B formula doesn't only occur with prime partners. Starting from any number and adding the numbers on the left and the right together creates double that number. This formula, A plus C equals 2B, distinguishes the primes that belong to a piece of geometry from the primes that do not. The next primes external to the threshold primes do not sum to double the center point and are not symmetric to that center point. Here the next prime to the left would be 3, and to the right would be 17. They have a sum of 20, not 18, and are unsymmetric to center point 9 because there are 5 numbers between 9 and 3, and 7 numbers between 9 and 17. So the extent of prime symmetry in relation to center point 9 ends at the threshold primes 5 and 13. 13 is the last number included with 9 center point, and it is also the first number that begins the next center point, 30. It seems that something along the lines of charge or perhaps magnetism is occurring in these threshold primes. In relation to center point 9, 13 would be considered positive, but in relation to center point 30, it would be on the left and would be considered negative. A magnetic repulsion would help explain the separation between these two pieces of geometry. The next aspect of these geometries we'll take a look at is the palindromic code they can be reduced to, and likely arise from. A palindrome is a number or a word that is the same forward and backward, like the word mom and the number 323. Because there are symmetric amounts of primes and composites around a center point, their quantities form a palindromic number. The red ones in this code represent primes, and between them, the black ones represent composites. These 111 segments are called twin primes. 2 primes separated by 1 composite. The 3 in the center represents the consecutive composites below it, 8, 9, and 10. There are only 9 numbers in this range we're looking at here. Surrounding center points 165 and 705, though, this palindromic code spans a range of 57 numbers. Here we're taking a look at how the prime numbers compact together to create radii. The threshold primes 5 and 13 are pushed together by magnetic force indicated by the red arrows here. This causes the consecutive composites running horizontally between them to move into a vertical position. Here's what that looks like after primes have been compacted. Some of this information comes through in the most beautiful ways. Sometimes when I begin to speak with people I meet about a current aspect I'm working on mathematically, channeled information starts to come through. Without seeing this geometry, a physical therapist and energy worker I was seeing following a surgery communicated that these threshold primes were pushed together by magnetic force. Threshold primes are the end of one code segment and the beginning of another. Spirit referred to these locations through her as contact points, where 2 pieces of geometry meet. Here are the first few contact points shown before primes are compacted. The curved arrows at the bottom of this image are indicating what's happening during the consecutive composites transition from linear to vertical positioning. The numerical range within these red brackets transform into the radii above these red arrows. In this image, we see at the contact points, threshold primes essentially occur twice. One is a positive and one is a negative. This again shows 13 is the end of center point 9's code segment. Since 9 would be the neutral point or the fulcrum, everything to the right of it would be positive, just as if 9 were at 0 and at the center of a plane. We also see here that 13 is the beginning of 30's palindromic code segment, where it would be negative. This applies to all threshold primes at these contact points. Effectively, these threshold primes cancel each other out and allow for the distinct separation of each palindromic code segment and therefore each individualized piece of geometry. It's also this property that likely factors into the magnetic force aspect. Radii consist of only odd quantities of consecutive composites. This means that radii heights are only 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc. After primes are compacted together, it becomes more obvious that they function as the spacers between each radius. These lines represent the 1-count radius created by number 6, the 3-count radius formed by numbers 8, 9, and 10, and the 1-count radius created by number 12. By circling these radii, the geometry within our number line emerges. These geometries best represent the strong force. According to Wikipedia, the strong force, or strong nuclear force, holds most ordinary matter together. That's a quote. Here we see our number line with the primes compacted. In between those two red lines is the center point 9. The layered geometry surrounding it indicates multiple layers of code that are overlapping. With the primes compacted, center point 30 is a beautiful piece of geometry. In those yellow areas, the connection to a piece of geometry called a spindle torus becomes apparent. We'll have to go into what a torus is in the future. That can be a video all of its own. For now, all that really needs to be known about them is that they're geometric or energetic structures that have motion in two directions. They spin like a planet in an east or west motion, but also have a vortex running through them and rotate on a north-south axis as well. The torus, plural tori, and magnetic fields have a connection. Averages and ratios. Just as summing any two numbers relative to a center point is double that center point, the median of odd quantities will be the average of those numbers. For example, 5 plus 6 plus 7 is 18, and 18 divided by 3 is 6, the median of those numbers. This likely helps solidify the geometries we see in the number line. Not only does it work for an individual radius, each section of palindromic code contains an odd quantity of numbers, so the physical center point of these larger pieces of geometry is also its average. 5 through 13 sums to 81, and 81 divided by 9 is 9. In the future, we can go into the ratios that unify these radii. I'm still working on aspects of that, and until then I guess you'll just have to take my word that as different as these pieces of geometry seem numerically, there's a unifying thread between them. Symmetry and charge. The nickel-iron core of the Earth gives Earth a magnetic field much like a bar magnet. You can see these iron filings create the same pattern surrounding the magnet. This 90-degree or orthogonal change is significant though. These magnetic field lines look like a 2D representation of a torus. The same geometries occur between each number radiating out from the center points within these geometries. From this perspective, they look like a horn torus. This symmetry in relation to the center point likely ties into the electromagnetic force. We're going to park here for a few minutes. This shows 5 areas of prime partner symmetry following the A plus C equals 2B formula that involve contact point 13. We now know that all prime partners follow this A plus C equals 2B formula relative to their palindromic code center point. This remains true until signs or charge is introduced. Now we're going to look at the deeper complexity happening around primes, first without the charge. Sometimes instead of having multiple radii like center points 9 and 30, a palindromic code segment will consist only of one radius. This is the case with center point 50 shown to the right here. Because the formula applies to all odd quantities, prime partners surrounding each individual radius, even the ones inside of these multiple radii code segments, follow this formula as well. So that means that all primes have at least 2 prime partners. 7's prime partner relative to center point 9 is 11, but because there's an odd quantity between 7 and 5, the A plus C equals 2B formula applies there as well. So each prime has a prime partner to its immediate right and to its immediate left, following whatever odd quantity of consecutive composites is there. If the center point is not right next to them, then it would have its usual mirrored prime partner on the other side of that center point. Bringing in the charge now. That means that primes occur at least once, each prime occurs at least once in the A position of the formula where it's negative, and at least once in the C position of the formula where it's positive. Without even plugging it into the formula, by just looking at it as a number, 7 has an even number of prime partners. It occurs once as -7 relative to center point 9, and once as +7 relative to median 6. You can see it essentially cancels itself out and becomes 0 because -7 plus 7 equals 0. Number 13, on the other hand, has 5 prime partners. Shown in these equations to the left, 13 occurs in the C position twice, surrounding center point 9 where it's positive. In relation to center point 30, 13 appears in the A position of 3 equations where it's negative. Because the 2 positive 13s and the 2 negative 13s cancel each other out, one negative 13 still remains as a value. 41 has 3 prime partners, which is a typical number within multiple radius code segments. This A plus C equals 2B formula only works if the absolute value of the numbers is used, without their positive or negative signs. This creates a paradox because if the center point is neutral, it must be at 0, as is shown in the plane in the top left corner, and the numbers then to the left of it would be negative, and the numbers to the right of it would be positive. In that case also, since B would be 0, 2B would also be 0. If there are an even number of prime partners for the primes in that equation, that does work because they would zero out, but it also means that this entire piece of geometry basically turns to 0. When charge is included, prime sums A plus C no longer equal 2B. The formula then changes to -A plus C equals n plus 1, n in this case being the consecutive composite quantity 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. This is shown in the top right there. So that equals 2 for all 111 code segments, it equals 4 for all 131 code segments, and 6 for all 151 code segments. The zeroing out that occurs means that most primes disappear anyway, and so there is no A or C in the formula unless the prime has an odd quantity of prime partners. This zeroing out of primes with an even quantity of prime partners likely relates to the Riemann hypothesis. For lack of a better word, these subprime partners provide asymmetries within the symmetric palindromic code segments. They are likely what physicists would link to the asymmetries needed within our universe so particles and antiparticles don't simply annihilate each other. It feels like this also connects to quantum superposition. The blue horizontal line there represents an additional layer of code bridging symmetries that run between center point 9 and 30. Its palindromic code segment would be 1, 3, 1, 1, 1, 3, 1, 1, 1, 3, 1. In this final image here, we're taking a look at gravity in the unified field. You can see the radii heights from 1 to 9 linearly as they would appear on the number line in the center. In the lower right of that image, the sum of these radii shows a relationship to the squares of numbers. 1 and 3 count radii sum to 4. Combining the 5 count radii brings that sum to 9. Then adding the 7 count radii, you get 16, and so on. Gravity, light, heat, sound, smell, and a number of other things share proportional relationships that are described by the inverse square law. One of these would be a car honking its horn as it drives by, and the sound becomes more faint the further it gets. The fact that these squares surface in the summation of the radii that relate to gravity is no accident. In physics, there are considered 2 kinds of gravity. In layman's terms, they call these big G and little g. Little g would likely be more relevant to the linear radii we see in the number line. This is the gravity we experience on Earth and the gravity experienced on other planets, as each planet is different. It seems little g would be more relevant here because each radius would contain a certain amount of mass. Big G, the gravitational constant seen throughout the universe, would likely be more relevant to the concentric circles seen from the perspective of looking through the number line, as this person is here. In one aspect, big G would be the sum of infinite squares. We now have seen the weak force, the strong force, the electromagnetic force, and gravity as different geometric expressions of one whole. These concentric circles hold our infinite number line, transformed into a single piece of geometry, the unified field. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope this helped make what's happening in the number line a little more clear. These are some topics that are going to be covered in future videos. It may be a few videos from now that I'll be able to get to the time as rolled up space aspect. Please subscribe here at Cosmic Porch on YouTube and also at cosmicporch.com/contact, where you can sign up with your email to receive notifications for upcoming collaboration events.